Viewers, welcome back to the show. Tonight we're talking about food handlers and their responsibilities. We're talking about the KFC case. Now, I want to go away from that and talk about the case of Graham, Barclay Horses and Ryan. Nuncio, this is a very interesting case.
Yep.
It involved a lot of plaintiffs, and give us the facts.
Yeah, look, this ended up being, this was an epidemic back in, was it, I think, a recent one, 2002. And basically there was heavy rainfall in New South Wales, and as a result, they had to take some time to harvest the oysters. Now, unfortunately...
it was an oyster farm.
Yeah, it was an oyster farm, yeah. And unfortunately, as a result of this, the plaintiff in this case contracted hepatitis A virus. And I said it was an epidemic in the end. Now, it went all the way to the High Court. The three defendants in this case was the state of New South Wales, the local council in that area, and also Barclay Oysters.
The oyster farm.
And I said went from I think the Supreme Court to the full federal court and then to High Court. So it was actually a very large case.
John, in the first instance, the single judge found all three defendants liable, which was overturned.
It was overturned, and the High Court in 2002, Tony, found that on public policy grounds and in this type of scenarios, the plaintiff, the poor oyster eater, like you and I, Tony, we can't get compensation for that.
But wasn't the key to the case, John, was that when you're dealing with the harvesting of oysters, there's processes they follow. When there's been an overflow of rainfall into the actual oyster farm, they wait 72 hours, then they use this special ultraviolet drying technique,
Exactly.
Which is as safe as you're going to get in these sorts of circumstances. They followed those processes, and sadly, people still got sick.
Yes, exactly. And also the fact that it was a very strict legal interpretation of the law, wasn't it, Tony?
It was.
Just with Barclay, I suppose the court found it was a 4-3 judgment, so it was fairly close from the High Court. It was very close. And what they said in relation to Barclay Horses was that, their processes were fine. They followed all the, I suppose, requirements. And this hepatitis A virus is something you really can't test for. So there's nothing else they could have done in the circumstances, which, I said, if you can't test for it, it's hard to...
And Nunsat was very, very pivotal to the decision.
Clearly, if there was relevant tests they could have done to see if there was a virus or an epidemic, then obviously they were put, I suppose, have a higher duty, but in this case, the court didn't find that.
But 4-3 meant that it was a very fine line, John.
Fine line. One of the dissenters, Tony, was Justice Kirby,
Yes.
The eminent statesman. Now, in this case, really is authority now that statutory authorities, as in this council, do not owe a duty of care to a class of persons merely because they possess statutory powers that could affect or protect those persons. Now, Tony, I find that it's a very strict reading of the law.
Well, my view of that interpretation of the law, John, is this. Unless a statutory authority is in some shape or form involved in the process, that is, if they fail to conduct their they fail to conduct their inspections or, routine checks, then they can be held liable. That's the way I read it.
Yes, and the court found in this instance that because the oyster industry in New South Wales was self-regulated, that the state really couldn't have done much more. Said, they couldn't go beyond any other powers, and so it's a bit onerous to put a liability on them. And
it depends on the relationship, doesn't it, Tony, between the statutory duty and the person affected. And
if it wasn't self-regulated and the actual authorities were heavily involved in the way they harvested these oysters, then I think the majority would have been 4-3 the other way, John.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a difficult one, and it said it was a big epidemic in the end, but unfortunately, it says not always someone can be responsible for these things.
And John, I agree with you. The reason why it went 4-3 was because, in my view, it would have been a heavy burden on the economy. There was over 2,000 plaintiffs, if not more.
There's public policy considerations here.
And it would have been massive payouts. There's another interesting case, similar to this, but involving prawns. And this case here was one where a restaurant purchased some prawns from a particular wholesaler who purchased them from someone else. Now, who's going to give me the facts of this particular case?
It's a 2006 New South Wales Court of Appeal decision, Tony. It is one of the most complicated contractual decisions I've ever seen in a court judgment, Tony.
Yeah, but it just shows you that the courts generally tend to interpret a clause heavily against the person trying to rely upon it.
Yeah. Look, this particular case, I suppose, is an extension of the original case because basically there was they said you got Regal Pearl, who's the restaurant who undercooked these particular prawns. Then you've got Taiwan, who Regal Pearl purchased the prawns from, and you got Great Ocean, who brought the prawns into the country. And that I suppose that side of the case was sorted. Regal Pearl and Taiwan were found liable for putting the plaintiff at risk. But then this particular case was about Taiwan's insurer, where they were going to indemnify Taiwan for the judgment they had against them.
Can I just
so it gets complicated.
For the payout.
Yeah, for the payout.
Wouldn't you think that when you're dealing with something as delicate as prawns, that the amount of handling involved here, you're going from storeroom, freezer, storeroom, pallets, planes.
Oh, look, especially with seafood and prawns and oysters and there's always going to be a high risk there.
But significantly, John, the court said that Regal Pearl, the restaurant, if they had cooked the prawns at the right levels,
yes,
it would have killed off the virus.
Yep.
They said that. The court said that.
But they also still found, though, that Taiwan, under the Sale of Goods Act, because they didn't sell goods to Regal Pearl, which are of merchantable quality, they were also liable. So they were both in the gun in the end.
Well, John, the relevance of that was that Regal Pearl went broke. They went bankrupt.
No, Taiwan did.
Taiwan went bankrupt. Yeah.
I'm interested in the part, Tony, where, in regards to the insurance issue,
yes,
the court finds that this wording, that we will pay for all amounts up to the limit of liability that an insured person becomes legally liable to pay in compensation for, in this case, personal injury and property damages, is not relevant here.
Oh, that was Zurich's position, but then ultimately said they're off of the judgment in the end, which was good for the plaintiff anyway.
And don't forget, when they appealed this decision to the higher court, they settled out of court because they didn't want the court to interpret that.
This is plain English, Tony. You're liable, yet this was being challenged and litigated.
Is there anything else you want to add to this issue about food handlers before we go? Because the time's flying.
Tony, in regards to Mr. Smith, who's in his local takeaway food store, it's all about processes, isn't it, Tony? If proper processes are not being followed, then in my view, legally speaking, under the laws in Victoria and Australia-wide, you may have a cause of action.
Refrigeration's important, Nonce.
Yeah, look,
cooking is important.
It can be one innocuous thing that can result in a severe brain damage. You've got to be careful and follow your processes.
So to you restaurateurs out there, shopkeepers, people that serve food, handle food, make sure you're wearing gloves, make sure you've got your refrigeration working properly, make sure you're cooking your food properly. If you follow those processes, even if something goes wrong, you probably won't be found liable. If you don't follow your processes, you've got issues. John, Nuncio, thanks for coming on board. It's been very interesting.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, viewers.
Viewers, thanks for watching. Stay tuned and please stay safe.